Imagine waking up one day and realizing your freedom didn't vanish. It was converted, not stolen by war or dictatorship, but quietly exchanged for a certificate, a mortgage, and a slogan you didn't write. Happy wife, happy life. The world didn't need to conquer you. It just needed you to say, I do. Herbert Marcuse warned us that modern systems no longer enslave men with violence. They seduce them with comfort, mask exploitation as duty, and label obedience as maturity. And the clearest manifestation of this is marriage. You think you've gained a partner. What you've gained is a role. Father, provider, fixer, protector. You are no longer a man. You are a function. What used to be your life is now infrastructure for someone else's expectations. Your evenings are no longer yours. Your hobbies, if they survive at all, must serve a purpose. Is it helping the family? Your money is now our money. But that hour is a euphemism because you don't decide where it goes. You just generate it. Marcuse called this repressive desublimation, the redirection of your deepest human impulses into socially acceptable channels that maintain the very system draining you. You think you're expressing your love, but you're performing a ritual choreographed to make you predictable, profitable, and pacified. What was once spontaneous and passionate is now regulated by calendars, anniversaries, and the looming threat of emotional withdrawal if you fail to perform. And here's the genius of the machine. It uses your nobility against you. Your loyalty, your work ethic, your desire to be good. Those aren't virtues in this system. They're levers. Levers that ensure you'll push through exhaustion, swallow frustration, and keep showing up. Because you're a man. And that's what a man does. You were never taught to ask, at what cost? Because asking feels selfish. It feels like betrayal. And that's precisely how obedience becomes self-policing. You were taught that love is sacrifice. That manhood is measured by what you give up, and so piece by piece, you offer yourself until what's left isn't a man, but a quiet, competent utility, reliable, replaceable, invisible. Marcuse said, the people recognize themselves in their commodities. They find their soul in their appliances, their cars, their homes. And in marriage, the man becomes one of those commodities. He becomes the house that needs maintenance, the car that never breaks down, the smile that never complains. But here's the darkest part: the system doesn't just exploit you. It teaches you to thank it for the privilege. When your needs go unmet, you rationalize. She's tired. The kids come first. I'm just being dramatic. You start managing your emotional pain the way you manage your inbox. Systematically, quietly, without disruption. And society claps. Look at him. What a good man. What a family man. What a selfless, upstanding citizen. You don't even notice that you've disappeared. You're still there in photos, in bank statements, in chore lists. But the real you, the one who once stayed up all night chasing dreams, who laughed too loud, who sometimes did selfish things just because he was alive, that man is on a milk carton. Missing since the day responsibility became your identity. This is not a condemnation of women. Marcuse never blamed individuals. He dissected structures. Marriage is not a villain in a love story. It's a gear in a machine. One that thrives on your silent compliance. One that survives by convincing you that anything outside it is immaturity, failure, or loneliness. But if you've ever felt the hollow echo after a quiet dinner, if you've ever stared at your reflection and asked, when did I stop being me? Then you felt the system glitch. And that glitch is the start of something rare: awareness. You were never told that the structure of marriage doesn't simply contain your love. It repurposes it. The erotic, the spontaneous, the irrationally passionate parts of you are not just tamed, they're converted into capital. Marcuse called it the social control of libido. What once was a fire that made you bold, impulsive, alive, becomes household energy, neatly rerouted into bills, birthday parties, school pickups, and home renovations. The system doesn't want your desire. It wants your reliability. OS is dangerous to a world built on schedules. That's why the moment you say, desire is no longer celebrated, it's managed. Sex becomes calendarized. Affection becomes conditional. And the spark that once defined your relationship becomes a reward for compliance. A well-behaved husband. A useful man. Marcuse wrote, "What is proclaimed and practiced as tolerance today is, in many of its most effective manifestations, serving the cause of oppression. Your patience, your cooperation, your willingness to wait and work and provide, all praised. But not because they make you free, because they make you manageable. You thought love was an escape from the world. But in marriage, it becomes an extension of the world's demands. You are expected to perform emotional labor, anticipate unspoken needs, manage moods, and do it all with the calm efficiency of a customer service rep at a Fortune 500 firm. Your love has become labor, and your value is tied directly to how little you ask for in return. Men who fail to meet this standard are punished, silently at first. Less warmth, shorter conversations, withholding of sex, then publicly shamed by in-laws, criticized by her friends, excluded from decisions. You learn quickly that to speak your needs is to risk the peace. So you stop speaking. You call it maturity, but it's silence purchased through fear, and all of it is sold to you as virtue. Marcuse warned that capitalist society pacifies rebellion by giving people just enough pleasure to mute their discontent. In marriage, you get moments of connection, a kiss in the kitchen, a warm look at night. But those are the crumbs that keep you loyal to the table you're not allowed to leave. You forget that you once demanded more from life. You forget that silence is not the same thing as peace. You begin to forget yourself. The man who once imagined building empires now celebrates small victories. A quiet dinner. A weekend without an argument. A month where the credit card balance didn't increase. You don't grow. You maintain. You don't expand. You endure. The very energy that once made you magnetic to her is now seen as a threat. If you chase new passions, she calls it a distraction. If you reconnect with old friends, she accuses you of drifting. You're told that compromise is love. But compromise without boundaries is collapse. And that's what most married men become, collapsed versions of who they were. Still functioning. Still smiling. Still paying. But hollowed out. Marcuse said, "Free election of masters does not abolish the masters or the slaves. You chose marriage. But what you didn't choose was the operating system it runs on. A system that measures your worth not by how alive you are, but by how easy you are to live with." And here's the part no one dares say. The woman didn't design this system. She benefits from it, yes. But she too is acting from a script handed down by mothers, movies, and market forces. The difference is, the system rewards her for compliance. It rewards you for disappearance. You start to notice it not with a scream, but with a whisper. When your opinions begin to shrink into safe answers. When you feel the need to preface your thoughts with, "Well, if that's okay with you." When your body is present at the dinner table, but your mind is pacing the perimeter of a life you can no longer call your own. That's the erosion. Not an explosion, but slow attrition. Not a betrayal, but a negotiation where your soul was the first item forfeited. Herbert Marcuse called this the flattening of human potential. The reduction of depth into function, of passion into politeness. Your identity becomes a tool, not a truth. And as the years stretch forward, the marriage doesn't liberate your masculinity. It regulates it. It decides what forms of strength are acceptable, what range of emotion is tolerable, what type of desire is permitted. You become legible to the system, but illegible to yourself. And the tragedy: you think it's your fault. When you stop feeling connected, you blame your stress. When sex dwindles, you blame your own confidence. When you begin fantasizing about silence, solitude, escape, you slap yourself into guilt. Because real men stay. That's the most powerful mechanism of control, when the prisoner guards his own cell, polices his own thoughts, silences his own hunger before it even surfaces. You've been taught that freedom is irresponsible, that wanting more is immature, that the mature man doesn't need to feel alive. He just needs to be dependable. But Marcuse warned that maturity, as defined by repressive society, is not growth. It is adjustment. And when the system is sick, to adjust is to decay. Even your sexuality becomes a liability. You were once desired for your unpredictability, your fire, your edge. But in marriage, your erotic energy must be domesticated. Sex becomes routine, negotiated, utilitarian. Not because she doesn't desire, but because the system no longer requires desire. It requires peace. And peace is bought with predictability. You become boring, not by nature, but by necessity. Because being interesting often means being disruptive. And so your raw edge is dulled. You no longer flirt with the world, you manage it. You no longer chase, you compromise. You no longer burn, you warm. This is not a flaw in you. It is a function of a system that fears the untamed male. Because an untamed man can't be easily sold stability. He can't be counted on to buy 2 cars, a house in the suburbs, a lifetime of insurance. He doesn't volunteer for the role of emotional sponge, financial pillar, and compliant servant. He walks through life with questions, dangerous ones. Marcuse believed that the system cannot survive awakened men. That's why it pushes sedation. Through comfort, through duty, through affection that operates like a leash. You are allowed to feel, but only within sanctioned boundaries. Allowed to dream, but only if those dreams fit inside a mortgage payment. But what happens when the man remembers? When the fire flares again beneath the grey layers of routine? When he stops confusing compliance with virtue and starts asking, "Who told me this was enough?" That's the rupture, and the system fears it. Because once a man tastes his full spectrum again, his erotic rage, his sovereign purpose, his right to joy without permission, he becomes unmanageable, not cruel, not reckless, just whole. You were taught that saying yes made you good. That flexibility made you strong. That compromise was love. But Marcuse warned, in a system designed to neuter resistance, the most dangerous man isn't the one who shouts. It's the one who whispers no, and means it. Not to be cruel, not to hurt, but to reclaim what was slowly bartered away in the language of sacrifice. And what was bartered? Time, energy, attention. The sacred space where your instincts once roamed wild. You gave it up for harmony, for approval, for love that came with conditions, camouflaged as care. You traded your edge for inclusion. You handed over the sword of self and received a diploma in maturity, signed by people who never knew your name. Here's the real seduction. The system flatters you while it deconstructs you. It doesn't say, "Oh, be." It says, "Grow up." It doesn't say, "Submit." It says, "Be responsible." And so the man walks into his own soft execution chamber, dressed in a tailored suit, smiling. His dreams shrink in quiet rooms. His boldness is rerouted into errands. His ambition is rewritten into checklists. Marcuse's most radical idea wasn't about economics. It was about refusal. The idea that a man could simply stop consenting to the terms of his quiet imprisonment. That he could choose joy over comfort, depth over approval. That he could stop confusing endurance with strength. That he could wake up. And when he does, the resistance doesn't come from his partner. It comes from the culture. Friends raise eyebrows. Family guilt trips him. Religion reminds him that the cross he bears is holy. Therapy may try to coax him back into the role of emotionally available servant, warning him against selfishness, when all he's done is begun to breathe. Because here's the threat, something unresolved. The man who refuses to collapse into function can no longer be counted on to uphold the machinery. He might start spending time alone. He might say no to social obligations that drain him. He might stop chasing sex that feels negotiated and start channeling his energy into art, philosophy, strength, silence. He becomes vivid again. And vivid men are dangerous, not violent, not abusive, just unwilling. Unwilling to play the game of polite disintegration. Unwilling to be emotionally available to everyone but himself. Unwilling to prove his worth through depletion. And that, according to Marcuse, is the beginning of liberation. Not found in slogans or protests, but in a man who reclaims his inner world from the scripts handed to him. A man who looks at the programmed phrases real men provide. Marriage makes you whole. A good husband sacrifices everything. And asks, who profits from me believing that? Not her. Not always. She too is inside the script. But the script itself, that is the enemy. That is the invisible architecture built to house your soul inside a structure of slow surrender. The man who reclaims himself doesn't need to leave marriage. He needs to leave the illusion. He needs to return to his edge, his instincts, his sacred yes and holy no. He doesn't seek chaos. He seeks clarity. He doesn't seek dominance. He seeks direction. And from that reclaimed self, he can love again, not as a provider, not as a role, but as a man whose wholeness cannot be outsourced. Marcuse's revolution was never about burning down the house. It was about refusing to be furniture within it. His philosophy wasn't a call to abandon responsibility. It was a call to reframe it. He asked, what if responsibility to yourself came before service to the machine? What if maturity meant depth, not obedience? What if love wasn't sacrifice, but alignment? The domesticated man is praised because he no longer disrupts. But disruption, in its highest form, is how evolution happens. A man who reclaims his internal compass becomes unpredictable again. Not erratic, not wild, but sovereign. And the system can't handle a sovereign man, because he listens less, consumes less, apologizes less. He starts asking difficult questions at dinner tables. He challenges assumptions at PTA meetings. He stops nodding when his soul says scream. But this is where the myth deepens. The system will tell you that if you do this, if you reclaim your edge, you will lose love. You will lose her. You will lose everything you built. And so men stay, they nod, they give. They die slowly because they fear exile. Marcuse tears that illusion apart. He argued that the highest form of liberation is not exit. It's transcendence. Remaining inside the structures, but no longer feeding them with your soul. Living among the myths, but refusing to breathe life into them. You don't need to run from marriage. You need to bring your full self into it and see if it can hold you. If it can't, it was never love. It was only domestication dressed in affection. And if it can, then you don't just survive. You create something the system cannot replicate. You become a man who loves not from obligation, but from overflow. Who provides not to prove, but because he chooses to. who gives not to get approval, but because giving does not cost him his center, and that man cannot be manipulated, because he knows what's his. He knows when to say yes, he knows when to say no, and he knows that love, real love, does not require your extinction.